Okay.
Let's just. All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Speaking of Jazz with the West Michigan Jazz Society. My name is Jordan Van Hemert, and I'm so thrilled to be bringing you this series, which is a series to promote Black History Month. We are so excited to be celebrating Black History Month, which, as we all know, is the origin point, or is the Black community is the origin point of jazz music. And we want to honor that, we want to respect it, we want to pay homage to it. And so to celebrate tonight, we're starting things off this month with the great bass player, Elgin Vines. Now, I apologize, the marketing may have shown that we had some different people online, but unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, those people could not join us, but Elgin and I are still gonna have a great conversation. So I want to introduce our guest. Elgin Vines has been described as one of the most sought after bassists in West Michigan. He has started striking the strings professionally over 40 years ago, making a switch from my instrument, the woodwinds. And he was named the 2005, wow, Jazz Musician of the Year by the West Michigan Jazz Society. Over his career, Elgin has performed with nearly every musician in the West Michigan jazz scene and has toured with many major recording artists. Please give it up for Mr. Elgin Vines. Elgin, welcome. Thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
So now my first question is a little bit of a personal one, because I see that you switched away from the woodwinds, which is my primary instruments. What made you switch to the bass?
Well, this happened when I was in college. Where it all started is that when I was in high school, my band director was a trumpet player, but he was also a science teacher. So I was looking at his career doing both. So when I decided to go to college, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do both of those. So when I got to college, I was a biology and chemistry major with a medical technology background thrown in there. But while I was at the university, my band director, who was the director of the concert band, came to me one day and said to me, how would you like to play bass? And the reason for him asking me this question, because he was a bass player and he was a member of a symphony, and he had a lot of commitments for casual gigs, so he couldn't do those. So he was willing to teach me bass so that I could do those gigs for him. So that's how that started. That caused I switched over from at that point. I started playing bass because he insisted that I should do that to take care of the casual gigs he couldn't do. So, yeah.
Well, he didn't exactly steer you wrong. I mean, you've had a very long and fruitful career on the instrument. What are some ways in which, now, first of all, where are you from, Grand Rapids, or did you just live here for a while?
I'm not from Grand Rapids originally. I'm from Virginia.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
And so, what brought you to Grand Rapids? Virginia is kind of a trek. So what brought you here?
Well, my wife did, I guess. I met my wife. And then when I met my wife, she mentioned to me that a lot of music was going on in Grand Rapids. And I was introduced to a musician by the name of Benny Carew by some of my elders here, one being Kurt Purnell and Mel Dalton. So I got introduced to Benny Carew. So I worked with Benny for several years, yeah. But before getting here, I had done a lot of television work prior to that. I had done Tonight Show. I had done Ed Sullivan Show. I had done Mike Douglas. And then while I was in college, I was doing daytime television show for 3 years. So all that stuff thrown in there, so yeah, a lot of television work.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible. I have, you see all of those videos of some of some amazing artists on Ed Sullivan, and you were one of them. Who were some of the artists that you played with on Ed Sullivan?
Well, I was with the trio. We happened to have been in New York at the time that the Beatles came to town. We were there at the same time the Beatles came in 1964, because we were at that time, we were working at the New York World's Fair.
Wow, that's outstanding. So now I want to talk. So when did you arrive in Grand Rapids?
In
Here.
1971.
71. Okay. So Grand Rapids has kind of changed pretty substantially since 71. So what are some of the ways that you've seen the community grow in a positive way?
Well, well, when I came to Grand Rapids, there were a lot of clubs for musicians to work. There were a lot of older musicians during that time too. There are a lot of clubs open for musicians to play. But some of that has changed. That I don't see it quite as much now, but it's in a different way it has changed. But it's a little bit different from when I first came to Grand Rapids. I don't know whether the scene has changed in terms of places to play has changed. I think that has helped change that whole situation.
So you mentioned earlier that you had some musical elders who kind of were kind enough to mentor you and stand beside you as a musician. I'm wondering if you might be able to talk about some of them. You mentioned Kurt Purnell and Mel Dalton.
Yes, they were great people to work with because they were also great teachers as well. As a musician, I think you should never stop learning. It's always I continue to learn. So with these people, I learn a lot from them because they each have a different way of doing things, and they would never criticize what you do. They might say, "Oh, why not try it this way, or this way, or this way?" And that way, I got to learn to do those things the way they like them done, without being criticized.
Yeah. So I've heard recordings of Mel Dalton, and I know I keep mentioning him. I'm a saxophonist, so I have to talk about the saxophone players of yesteryear. And, when I hear him, he has this beautiful, big sound that he played with. And I'm wondering if you could kind of talk about what Mel's playing was like from the standpoint of a bass player.
He was almost like a Coltrane type, but the way he played, he was a great player for bass players, because the way he phrased, the way he played his changes, I like those kind of players because it invigorates me. It makes me want to play things differently too, to support what they're playing. So it was very inspiring to work with people like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And Mel I think you've hinted at this, but how was Mel as a person, like off the bandstand? Was he a close colleague of yours?
Yes, you couldn't have a better person to work with or be around, no matter on the bandstand or off the bandstand, no matter what. Same thing about Kurt Purnell.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I find what I've been finding lately is that the like the really great musicians, they play that way because they've got a good heart, and they've got like a good soul. And so I just always find that the best musicians are really, really generous and kind people. And it sounds like Kurt and Mel were both those kinds of people.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So you were named the West Michigan Jazz Society Musician of the Year in 2005. Now, you had been on the scene for a while before that. So
Yes.
can you describe receiving that honor and did what it meant to you?
It made me think that the people were appreciated the way I played, and the my contribution to the music in this area.
That's outstanding. And what, so you have contributed as a bass player, which, you know, we all know, don't tell the drummers this, most important person in the band, right? Most
Yes.
important person up there, that's right. So as a bass player and as somebody who's been, you know, on the scene for such a long time, what is it that you had hoped to contribute when you got here to the scene?
Well, my musical knowledge in some way, because I've learned my repertoire was extensive. I knew all the tunes pretty much. So when people look for a bass player that could either both read and play without the music, so that was very helpful too. And my playing, when I like to play with people, and I hope when I play with them that I bring something to the music. If no more than just making sure that the drummer sets a groove, you know. Yeah, I'm not in such a way like a metronome, but flexible enough to keep the rhythm and time in place. Yes,
Yeah,
I like to play
absolutely.
with the bottom. I like to play on the bottom to give some resonance to the music.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we know that, you know, that bottom sound is, those low frequencies are something that I think a lot of people try to produce these days more artificially. Like they
Yeah,
try to like use computers and such to like create that feeling in the music when it's really not there. But I
yes,
think when we have great bass players like yourself, it kind of just does that automatically, so you don't even need the computer, you know?
yes, yes. Yeah.
So we got a couple comments here on the Facebook stream, and it says, Terry says, yes, I saw you on the Mike Douglas show when you were on the road. You were my brush with greatness, is what Terry says. And then Tiana's in here and says, the low end is my favorite. So you got some fans in here, Elgin. Um, and then of course we have Kevin Jones, who says Mel Dalton and Kurt Purnell, both great players. Of course, he's not around, but I still regard him as my father-in-law, and so Elgin is my uncle. So, and then he said, I love playing with Elgin, one of my favorite bass players. So clearly you've you know cultivated a lot of love in the Grand Rapids area, and that continues to this very day. And I think when I think about, you know, the mark of a musician who's left a lot, I think about like the longevity of your career, because you're still playing. I see your bass behind you,
Still playing.
and you're still playing gigs and you're still playing tunes, and well, maybe not gigs so much anymore, but as far as COVID goes, but you know, you're still playing, and I think about your longevity. You know, we lost Clifford Brown at such a young age,
Yes,
and you know, we lost Lee Morgan so young, Bird so young.
yes,
But here you are, you know, somebody who has been around to see many great musicians come through the area, and you're still here. You're still making an impact, and I think that's such a noteworthy thing. Um, you know, I've heard that you really like to work with the younger musicians to inspire them. Can you
yes.
talk about what drives you to do that?
Well, I've been given so much from older musicians, and I think it's my duty to give back to the younger musicians as well. I've gained so much, so I need to give some of that back, return that. Yes,
You know, I that's such a beautiful sentiment, and I think that when we have older musicians like you who are our elders, who are out there with that attitude, I think the scene can only benefit. Our young people can only benefit from that. And I think, thank you as one who also teaches students, for what you're doing as a mentor to younger musicians, because I just think that's so important. And I think you do have so much to share, like so many great experiences that all come out in your music. We got Tim Franzik in here, and he says, Elgin still has that energy, which comes through in the music. And I get that even just from talking to you right now, that you've got that energy for the music. And Martine Dalton is in here, and she says, Dad would always get excited when Elgin was on a gig. And he said, he's such a mellow cat. I love him. And so I just think that when I listen to stories about the musicians of yesteryear, our musical elders in Grand Rapids, there's so much love, there's so much community, there's so much kindness that I hear.
Yes.
And it makes me, well, first of all, it makes me wish that I was, living back then so I could play with you all. But I think moreover, it reminds me about how important it is to be somebody in the world of music who is somebody who does give back, who does give things to the bandstand. Now you talked about groove, and I'm wondering, who were your influences growing up, and what music were you listening to as you were coming up?
Well, the bass player, I used to listen to Paul Chambers a lot. One of the first people that I really listened to was Paul Chambers, because I used to like the way he phrased, the way he played solo with that sort of a horn-like rhythm.
Yeah.
And was very solid.
Mm-hmm. Who were some non-bass players that inspired you? Some other artists?
Well, there are a lot of excellent local bass players too. Excellent, those guys. I learn from them as well too. When I hear them play, they might be playing a tune that I've played before, and they play something different, and I grab that when I get home, probably I'll play that same tune and see if I can duplicate that, or if there's something I want to play differently from what they played. So it's sort of a growing type attitude,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one, that for musicians, I used to hear stories about Mary Lou Williams and
Yes.
how she would go to Minton's in New York City to hang out with the younger musicians because she wanted to learn from them. And I know that there were a lot of older musicians who kind of scoffed at that and said, "Oh, Mary, why are you doing that?" And she said, "Well, it's, you can learn from all these people." And I see that same attitude in you, that same attitude in listening. So you're slated to play a gig on February 16 for the GR Noir and West Michigan Jazz Society celebration of Black History Month musical event. And I'm wondering, when people hear your group, what sort of music could they expect to hear? What sorts of songs might you be playing?
It all depends. It's almost like when I play in a gig and you have no idea what the people like to listen to. Usually when I walk in the room, I look around the room to see who the audiences are, the ages of people in that particular room. And I try to pick some tunes, I think, from different areas of music. And at some point, I find what people like to listen to in that room. I don't take it for granted that I'll play something that everybody's going to enjoy it. So I try to provide something for everybody within that setting.
Wow, that's amazing. And so you So you're really, since you know the music so well, you're reading the room as you go along then, as the gig goes on.
Yes.
All right. So when you have, say, a group of people who are more middle-aged and they're bobbing their heads to the music, what do you tend to play for them?
I play more of that.
More of that?
Music. Whatever that
Yeah.
music they're dancing and planting their feet to, I play more of that.
So you're
Because
watching for the signs.
exactly, and they give you sort of like a feedback. You can see the
Mhm.
feedback from the people in the room. Yeah.
And we already have some people in here saying that's a fantastic ability. I agree. I think that's a really great, kind of like a sixth musician's sense, if you will, another sense in there. So I'm wondering if we have any questions from our audience. Elgin is pretty much an open book, so I'm wondering if any of our audience has any questions. We'll wait for those, and while we're waiting, I just want to tell you that Speaking of Jazz with the West Michigan Jazz Society is provided free of charge to help you get to know musicians from our area and musicians around the country. We are dedicating this month's series to the celebration of Black History Month. And so all throughout February, you'll hear from a variety of different musicians. And our first one is right here from Grand Rapids, by way of Virginia, Mr. Elgin Vines. So if you've got any questions for Elgin, please let me know, and we'll make sure those get answered on the air here. So I'm wondering, I feel like everybody's got one of these stories, but what's a gig story where when you tell that story, somebody says, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened." Do you have any stories like that?
I can't think of it at this point, but I'm sure I've had them at one time. Can't think of them now. I think everyone has those kinds of stories at some point.
Huh? We've got a question from Monica, and she says, "What's your favorite song to play?"
I get asked that question a lot. I do.
I bet
I
you do.
do. Yeah. The Shadow of Your Smile is one of them. I love that tune. The Shadow of Your
Yeah,
Smile.
that's a great one.
Yeah.
Beautiful song.
Yeah.
Now, Jackie says, "Elgin, tell your Oscar Peterson story."
Oh, well, I know what the story is. That I was playing in New York in the NBC building in a nightclub there. And I was there with the trio. And a friend of mine, Monty Alexander, brought Oscar Peterson up to hear me play. So they sat there for about 2 sets. And the piano player I was working with knew Oscar pretty well. So Oscar, he had Oscar come up and play a couple tunes. So I played with Oscar maybe 20, 25 minutes there on that set. And then the next morning, I got a phone call from Oscar Peterson. For me, well, he wanted me to know if I could go on the road with him to replace his bass player. Yeah.
How many people can live their lives and say, "Oh, I got a call from Oscar Peterson asking me to get in the road"? And I'm sorry I interrupted you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay. And I answered the phone call, and I was so shocked him getting a call from him. Took me a while to get over it. And my friend, who was not a bass, but a drummer, was recording the conversation. And I had to tell Oscar Peterson that I can't do it. And I think about that now. And the reason being is that the group I was with had been with him for quite some time. So if I would have left that group would have fallen apart. So I didn't want to do that. But when I told him that, he appreciated that, give him that answer, that he understood how that works, you know. But I've been knowing Monte Alexander for a long time. In fact, Monte asked me to go on the road with him as well.
You're a very in-demand musician here, Elgin. That's incredible. Very cool. We have another question. What is the meaning? This is from Kevin, and he says, what does Black History Month mean as it pertains to the music?
Well, because Black people have been involved in music for years and years, and there's a lot wrapped around the musical aspect of it that encompass Black History Week. Yeah.
We got a question from Michelle here, and she says, "Hey, Dad, share some more fun stories of famous people you've been able to play with."
I'll do that. Okay. I played with Leslie Uggams, Hines and Dad, Phyllis Hyman, Ruth Brown, Gary U.S. Bonds, Eloise Laws. A lot of these are singers, you know.
Yeah.
And I did some work with Steve Allen as well, and the Mills Brothers.
So you've played with a lot of singers.
Yeah.
Can you describe the experience of playing with singers and also what you think inclines singers to call you so frequently?
Well, I think singers call me because first thing, when I play with singers, I'll listen to this singer when I'm playing with them.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I listen to, the singer. Everybody else in the background, but there's something about listening to singers and trying to get the feeling they're trying to portray in their music. So I'm listening very intently so that I can make my notes fit what they're singing. So I love singers because singers make you become, they make you a better bass player playing behind singers, because the demand playing behind singers is much greater than instrumental, really, in most cases. They require more.
Absolutely. So we had another question. Is there anyone you'd like to play with that you haven't played with yet?
Jordan.
Well, the feeling is mutual, my friend. The feeling is mutual.
Yeah.
Now, I have a question in here, and it says, "What is it like to mentor the young students?"
It can be interesting. It can be frustrating as well in some cases. I had a bass student once while I was teaching, but the person, he wasn't really willing to study. He wasn't willing to practice, that kind of thing. So, and then when you get people like that, you lose interest in that particular student. But there are students who are willing to learn whatever you have to offer them. And that may inspire you to give them everything you know. No, you're willing to just give it to them. Yes, so it's a big difference. People who are willing to learn and those who aren't.
Yeah, and you know, I think I think sometimes students get a bad rap. I think sometimes students get like, get a bit of a bad rap. But I think, you know, when you find that student who really wants to learn, it is invigorating.
Yes.
And can you describe a time maybe when you've been invigorated by a student who really wants to learn?
Oh, give an idea. A student that you say, for instance, you give a student something to learn,
Hmm.
a particular lesson to learn, and when you come back to, they will have done that.
Hmm.
That's inspiring, which means your energy has not gone to waste. Your teacher has not gone to waste. That means they're interested in learning what you offer them, you know.
Hmm.
So you want to give more and more and more because of that, the attitude. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the gift that keeps on giving, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
Speaking of gifts, so I just remembered you mentored a friend of mine, Elon Sullivan.
He's a good kid. He's a wonderful player too, as well.
Yeah, yeah, he's a wonderful player.
Yes,
Can
he
you
is.
talk about what it was like to work with Elon?
Oh, it's so much fun, you know, because he's just so full of energy. You
Yeah.
know, he's willing, he listens to you no matter what you're doing. And he's very experienced player, but whatever you offer him, he still is very receptive of it, you
Hmm.
know. Yes.
Yeah,
Even
Elon. What? Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
even if you're telling him something that he already knows, you don't know that. He's still, I think that works very well for people when even if you know something and somebody's trying to give something to you, you just receive it anyway and take it as if you didn't know it.
Mm. Yeah, I think people like not only students like Elon, but people like Elon. I mean, we could use some more of those. I think, at
Yes,
least. I
yes,
think we
yes,
could really, really use some more of those.
yes,
Um, so yes, so Alon is one of those students who I think really, just kind of invigorates you.
yes, he
Um,
is.
yeah, and he keeps you on your toes.
Yes,
He
yes,
really keeps you on your toes,
yes,
uh, because I think I know a saying where a lot of teachers like to stay a few steps ahead of their students. A lot of teachers like to, so that they're able to give their expertise. And I think that in the case of Alon, that is very difficult to do. It's hard to stay a
yes, it
couple steps
is.
out of that guy.
Yeah, I've had fun playing with him. No piano player, just a bass and horn.
Hmm.
Very interesting. It's fun to do it that way, you know.
Well, it's very freeing, right?
Yes, it is. Yes,
You can take the music a lot of places that way.
yes, that's true. Yeah.
So when you are playing in configurations like that, so I know you frequently work with singers
Hmm.
and you frequently work with a trio, of piano, bass, drums. When you do work in configurations that are different, such as saxophone and bass, or a horn and bass, and doesn't have to be saxophone, what do you find that you learn from those experiences?
It makes me think about what I have to play. I just can't play any little thing. You can't be going all over the bass looking for notes. You got to be root bound, that sort of kind of, you know, so that the bottom is there, so that person can play off of that, you know.
Mhm.
If I'm playing all that stuff up top, you don't have any bottom left. You're just two people. It's not doesn't work so well.
Well, I imagine it would sound kind of empty.
Yes, yes.
So what is another, do you ever work with a trio, like a horn, bass, and drums, like without the piano?
I've done it as well. Yes.
Yeah. And so what's that like when you work with that kind of group? What do you enjoy about that?
Well, with the three people there, your thinking is different, and your chord changes can be different, depending on depending on who you're working with, who those people are, how much music they play, how they voice things. So that determine what I play. So you can have people playing things very pretty much outside. So that means somebody's got to be anchored there. I have, as a bass player, I got to sit on it a little bit, you know. Yes, that makes a difference. I've played with guitar players as well, which I love guitar players
Mhm.
and horn players, that kind of trio. You got a
What do
different
you
feel. Hmm?
What do you love about that? Guitar players and the horn players.
Well, it seems like there's more freedom in there somewhere. You got a lot much more freedom. And all I'm doing, the guitar player is playing chordal changes, and I'm listening to what he's playing and what the horn player is playing. So it works very well because you listen to each other, hopefully, and you don't get in everybody's way, but you make it blend, make it feel good, make it work. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you you've been around a lot of years, and I know I keep saying that, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to make you
That's
feel
okay.
like history or anything. What would you say is your advice to some of the younger musicians who are looking to pursue the kind of life that you've pursued in music?
Oh, well, I think the first thing, if they're going to play, you got to learn to respect the music, be on time, learn your music. And when you do play, be respectful of the people that you're working with. Yeah. And don't have an attitude when you go in those settings. That can destroy the music, pretty much. So I work with people who have attitudes about things, and there's not much harmony within that structure, and it doesn't work.
I think it's interesting how something like an attitude can change the music so much. And I think a lot of people, especially younger musicians, they'll say, all right, if I can just get really good at my instrument, which is important.
Yes.
That's not, I mean, that's not unimportant, but if they just think if I can get really good at the music, then that will be it. But they forget about being able to actually work with people like you're saying.
Yeah.
And I think it surprises them. I don't know if you've ever seen a young person be surprised about that sort of thing, about having an attitude and how it can bring a whole bandstand to pieces. But I think that does surprise a lot of people.
Yes, it does. Yeah. Yeah. And I've worked with people before. Well, I've hired people. At least I called people about a job, and they said, I'm a jazz player. I play jazz. That's it. I don't understand what that means. Are you a musician?
Mm-hmm.
Are you just a jazz player? So when you hear that sort of turns you off a little bit, because I think musicians, although you could be a jazz player, but you should be also flexible. Could play whatever it calls for. That's the way you make a good living, if you're flexible. You can play jazz anytime, any place, but that kind of having that flexible, open attitude makes a difference as to whether people will call you or not. They might call
That's
you
right.
one time, but they might not call you again. Yeah.
Yeah. And we got Tim in here saying, playing with Elgin is a learning experience for all the people involved, the band and the audience, because of his openness to share. Now we also have Kevin in here saying, exactly, that's why I love working with Elgin, one of the nicest human beings I have ever met, not to mention a great bassist. So it seems, Elgin, that you've really, really made your mark on the people of this area, and the not only the music scene, not only the musicians, but audiences. I'm noticing that you have all these people saying, hi, Dad, in the chat here, in the comments. And so I'm assuming, that you're a great family man as well, and that you've devoted a lot of your time and energy to your family. And will you talk about being a working musician and also being a family man like you are, and being what it takes to be successful about that?
Being a family man.
Well, yeah, and being a working musician, working as much as you are.
Well, you just have to be conscious of what you're doing and how much you're working, and you have to pay attention to family. You're a musician, but you still have to pay attention to your family as well, you know. So my wife loves music,
Mhm.
and she keeps me grounded, sort of, kind of, in the music, because her father was a bass player. And so my kids are music people. And so that's very comforting too. You know, it sort of keeps it together, you know, that kind of thing. They understand when I'm playing, what it means for me to go out and have a job and come back, and the time, the things that required to be a musician. So it all works.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful sentiment. So we've got Tanner in here who says, growing up in Grand Rapids playing with Elgin was a major part of my musical education that I will always appreciate. How does it make you feel when you hear musicians say things like that?
It makes you feel great. It makes you feel wonderful. It does, you know. Yeah, it does. Yeah. To be thought of that way, it just makes you feel wonderful, you know. Yeah.
Well, Elgin, I want to thank you again for your time. You've been wonderful. I've had a great time getting to know you, and I'm hoping that everybody will tune in on February 16 at to the live stream from GR Noir to hear the Elgin Vines Trio and the 10th World. And again, I just think that you've made such an impact, Elgin. Thank you for everything that you have done, everything that you continue to do for the Grand Rapids music scene, and everything that you continue to do for those students who are fortunate enough to interact with you, to play with you, to be under your tutelage.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you.
All right, everybody, have a great night. We'll be back next week with another Black History Month discussion. And thanks again to Mr. Elgin Vines. Thank you, Elgin.
Thank you.